At Thanksgiving dinner, my niece asked, "Uncle, why does Mommy call you a waste of space?" The table went silent. I looked at my sister and said, "Because Mommy peaked in high school and needs someone to blame." She screamed. I hugged my niece and walked out. 3 days later, Mom called saying I ruined the family. "My name's Frank, I'm 34, and I want to tell you about the Thanksgiving that burned my family to the ground and somehow ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me." But before I get into the holiday itself, I need to give you some background, because this didn't start at a dinner table. This started about 20 years ago, when my older sister Megan decided I was the reason her life wasn't perfect, and my mother decided that sounded about right. Growing up, Megan was the golden child. I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying that because there was literally a framed collage in my mother's hallway titled Megan's Achievements, and it had everything from her kindergarten graduation ribbon to her senior prom queen sash. You know what was on my side of the hallway? A family photo where I had my eyes closed and nobody bothered to retake it. That about sums up my childhood. Megan is 3 years older than me, and from the moment I could form memories, she made sure I knew the pecking order. She was the smart one, the pretty one, the one who was going places. I was the afterthought, the accident, as she once told me when I was 9, which my mother overheard and responded to by telling me to stop being so sensitive. Not, "Megan, don't say that to your brother." Just, "Frank, toughen up." That became the family motto whenever Megan did something cruel. "Frank, toughen up." "Frank, she didn't mean it." "Frank, you're overreacting." My dad, Greg, was a decent guy, but he had the backbone of a wet noodle when it came to standing up to my mom. Her name is Diane, and Diane ran that house like a small dictatorship with floral wallpaper. Whatever Diane said was law, and Diane said Megan was special and I was fine. Not special, just fine. The kind of fine where you get BS in school and nobody claps, but your sister gets a B+ and they throw a dinner party. Here's the thing though, I wasn't just fine. I was actually pretty good at stuff. I played guitar, I could fix anything mechanical, and I had a knack for business that nobody in my family ever noticed because Megan was busy getting a marketing degree from a state school and acting like she'd been accepted to Harvard. Don't get me wrong, good for her for going to college. But the way my family treated her diploma, you'd think she cured something. Meanwhile, I went to trade school for HVAC and electrical work, and you would have thought I told them I was joining the circus. My mother literally said, "Well, someone has to do those jobs, I suppose." I suppose. Like I'd volunteered to clean gutters for a living instead of choosing a career that would eventually make me more money than anyone in my family. But we'll get to that. After trade school, I started working for a local company, busting my tail 60 hours a week. I was good at it. Really good. By 25, I had my master electrician's license and was running crews. By 28, I'd saved enough to start my own contracting business. Small at first, just me and 2 guys I trusted. But it grew. Steadily, quietly, it grew. And during all of this, you know what my family's reaction was? Nothing. Crickets. Megan got a promotion to assistant marketing coordinator at a mid-sized company, and my mom called everyone she knew. I landed a $200,000 commercial contract, and my mom said, "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Megan is thinking about getting a new car?" Now, Megan married a guy named Todd when she was 27. Todd is exactly the kind of guy you'd expect Megan to marry. Decent looking, talks a big game, sells insurance, and has never once in his life admitted to being wrong about anything. They had a daughter, my niece Lily, who is now 6 and is genuinely the sweetest kid on the planet. I love that little girl more than I can explain. She's the only reason I kept showing up to family events for as long as I did, because every time I thought about cutting ties, I'd picture Lily's face lighting up when she saw me, and I couldn't do it. But Megan made even that complicated. See, Megan had this habit of talking about me like I wasn't there, or like I was some kind of cautionary tale. At family dinners, she'd make little comments. "Frank, are you still doing the handyman thing?" It wasn't a handyman thing. I had 12 employees and a fleet of trucks. "Oh, Frank, I saw a documentary about guys who work in trades. It looked so hard. I don't know how you do it." She'd say it with this smile, this patronizing, syrupy smile, like she was complimenting a child for tying their shoes. And the waste of space thing. That started about 2 years ago. I know because Lily accidentally let it slip at a barbecue. She tugged on my sleeve and said, "Uncle Frank, Mommy says you're a waste of space." What does that mean? I almost dropped my plate. I looked at Megan, who had gone completely pale, and she stammered out something about Lily misunderstanding a conversation. My mother immediately jumped in and said Lily was probably just confused. Kids say the darndest things. Let's change the subject. And just like that, it was swept under the rug. Like everything else. I went home that night and sat in my truck in the driveway for about 40 minutes. Just sat there. My girlfriend at the time, Claire, came out and asked if I was okay, and I told her what happened, and she said something that stuck with me. She said, "Frank, how many more times are you going to let them treat you like you don't matter before you believe them?" That hit me right in the chest, because the truth was, part of me was starting to believe them. Despite the business, despite the money, despite everything I'd built with my own hands, there was still this little kid inside me who just wanted his mom to put his picture on the wall. But I kept going back. Christmas, Easter, birthdays. I kept showing up with a smile and a bottle of wine and pretending everything was fine. For Lily. Always for Lily. And every time, Megan would find a way to remind me where I stood. She'd seat me at the far end of the table. She'd make jokes about my job. She'd talk over me in conversations. And my mother would sit there and let it happen, or worse, laugh along. Then came last Thanksgiving, the one that changed everything. My mom hosted, like she always does. Big spread, the whole family. Megan, Todd, Lily, my cousin Derek and his wife Paige, my Aunt Linda, and a few of my mom's church friends. I brought Claire and a pecan pie I'd spent 3 hours making because my grandmother's recipe was the one thing in our family that was actually sacred. When I walked in, my mom said hi to Claire first, complimented her sweater, and then looked at me and said, "Oh Frank, you look tired. Are you sleeping enough? No hello. No nice to see you." Just an immediate implication that I looked like garbage. Classic Diane. Dinner started off fine. Turkey was good. Everyone was making small talk. I was sitting next to Lily, who was chatting my ear off about her school play where she was playing a tree, and honestly, it was the happiest I'd been in weeks. That kid has a way of making the world feel simple. And then, right in the middle of a conversation about literally nothing important, Lily looked up at me with those big brown eyes and said, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Uncle Frank, why does Mommy call you a waste of space?" The table went dead silent. I'm talking you could hear the gravy cooling. Everyone froze. Forks stopped midair. Todd looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Megan's face went from tan to ghost white in about half a second. And my mother just stared at her plate like she was trying to telepathically move the cranberry sauce. I looked at Lily. Then I looked at Megan. And something inside me just snapped. Not in a rage way. In a clarity way. Like a fog lifted, and I could suddenly see the entire picture for what it was. 20 years of being the punching bag. 20 years of being told I was less than. And my 6-year-old niece was the one delivering the message because she didn't know any better. I looked right at Megan and I said, calm as anything. Because Mommy peaked in high school and needs someone to blame. Megan screamed. Not yelled. Screamed. Like I'd set the table on fire. The sound that came out of Megan's mouth was something between a shriek and a war cry. She shot up from her chair so fast it scraped across the floor and nearly toppled over. Her face had gone from white to crimson in about 2 seconds, and she was pointing at me like I'd just confessed to a crime. "How dare you," she screamed. "How dare you say that to me in front of my daughter? In front of everyone." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just looked at her and said, "Megan, your daughter just repeated something you've been saying about me behind my back. At a Thanksgiving dinner. In front of the entire family. And you're mad at me." She sputtered. That's the only word for it. She opened her mouth 3 different times and nothing coherent came out. Todd, to his credit, was trying to gently pull her back into her seat, but Megan swatted his hand away like he was a mosquito. My mother finally spoke up, and if you're hoping she said something reasonable, you clearly haven't been paying attention. "Frank," she said, in that low, disappointed tone she'd perfected over 34 years. "This is Thanksgiving. This is not the time or place for this kind of behavior." My behavior. Not Megan calling me a waste of space, so often that her 6-year-old memorized it. My behavior. For responding to it. I looked at my mom and I said, "You're right, Mom. It's not the time or place." But apparently every day at Megan's house is the time and place to teach Lily that her uncle is worthless, and you don't seem to have a problem with that. Diane's mouth tightened into that thin line she gets when she knows she's wrong, but would rather eat glass than admit it. She said, "Megan didn't mean it like that. You know how she talks. You're being dramatic. Dramatic. There it was. The word that had been used to dismiss every legitimate feeling I'd ever had in that family. You're being dramatic, Frank. You're overreacting, Frank. Can't you just let it go, Frank? No, not this time. Not anymore. I stood up slowly. I folded my napkin and put it on the table. I walked over to Lily, who was looking around the room with wide, confused eyes because she had no idea what she'd started, and I knelt down and hugged her. I told her, Lily, your Uncle Frank loves you very much. Don't ever forget that. She hugged me back and whispered, I love you too, Uncle Frank. And that almost broke me. I could feel my throat tightening and my eyes burning, but I held it together because I was not going to give Megan the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I stood up, took Claire's hand, and we walked out. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting. Megan was sobbing. My mother was saying something about how I'd ruined dinner. Aunt Linda was trying to calm everyone down, and Todd was asking if anyone wanted more wine, which honestly was the most useful thing Todd had ever contributed to a family gathering. Claire and I got in the truck, and I just sat there for a minute. She didn't say anything. She just held my hand and let me sit with it. After a while, I started the engine and said, I think I'm done. She squeezed my hand and said, I think you've been done for a long time. You just finally admitted it. She was right. I had been done for years. I'd just been too stubborn, too loyal, too hopeful that maybe one day things would change. That maybe my mom would look at me the way she looked at Megan. That maybe Megan would realize I wasn't her enemy. But that was never going to happen, and Lily's innocent question was the proof I couldn't ignore anymore. The next 3 days were a blur of phone calls I didn't answer. My phone lit up like a pinball machine. Megan called twice, both times leaving voicemails that were just her crying and saying I'd humiliated her. Todd sent a text that said, that was uncalled for, man. Derek texted me a thumbs up emoji and then a follow-up that said, sorry, that was meant for someone else, which I'm about 90% sure was a lie because Derek had always thought Megan was insufferable. And then, on day 3, my mother called. I almost didn't pick up. Claire gave me a look that said, you don't have to, but something in me needed to hear what Diane had to say. Maybe I was still that kid hoping she'd surprise me. She didn't. Frank, she said, and I could already hear the tone. Not concerned, not apologetic, accusatory. Frank, you need to call your sister and apologize. You ruined Thanksgiving. The whole family is upset. Linda called me and said she's never seen anything so ugly at a holiday dinner. And the Hendersons from church were there. Frank. The Hendersons. I almost laughed. The Hendersons. That was her concern. Not that her daughter had been bad-mouthing me so viciously that a child internalized it. Not that I'd spent my entire life being treated like second best in my own family. The Hendersons might think less of us. That was the emergency. Mom, I said, keeping my voice level. Did you hear what Lily said at that table? She paused. Children repeat things out of context all the time, Frank. You know that. I said, out of context? Mom, what context makes calling your brother a waste of space acceptable? Is there a context I'm missing where that's a term of endearment? She got flustered. Your sister is under a lot of stress. Todd's been having trouble at work, and she's been dealing with Lily's school situation, and you come in there and embarrass her in front of everyone instead of handling it privately like an adult. I said, Mom, I've been handling things privately for 20 years. I've been swallowing every insult, every dig, every time you've made me feel like I don't matter. And what has it gotten me? My niece asking me why her mother thinks I'm worthless. So no, I'm not apologizing. Not this time. There was a long silence. Then she said the thing that told me everything I needed to know. She said, Frank, if you can't put this behind you and be the bigger person, then maybe it's best if you don't come to Christmas. She didn't say, let's work this out. She didn't say, I'll talk to Megan. She gave me an ultimatum. Apologize or be exiled. And that's when I knew that my mother had never been neutral. She'd always been on Megan's side. She just dressed it up as keeping the peace. I said, okay, Mom, I won't come to Christmas. And I hung up. Claire was sitting on the couch watching me, and when I put the phone down, she said, how do you feel? And honestly, I felt like someone had scooped out my insides with a melon baller. I felt hollow, because even though I knew I was right, even though every rational part of my brain was telling me I'd finally stood up for myself, there was still that little kid inside me who just lost his mom. Not to death, to something worse, to indifference. I didn't sleep much that week. I'd lie awake replaying every moment, Every holiday, every comment. I started keeping a mental list of all the times I'd been overlooked or belittled, and the list was so long it made me sick. The time Megan told me at my own birthday dinner that she was pregnant, and my mom spent the rest of the night talking about baby names. The time I won a business award from the local Chamber of Commerce and invited my parents to the ceremony, and my mom said she couldn't make it because Megan needed help picking out bathroom tiles. Bathroom tiles. Over her son being recognized for building a successful company from nothing. Claire finally sat me down about a week after Thanksgiving and said something I needed to hear. She said, "Frank, you've spent your whole life trying to earn something that was never available to you. Your mother's approval isn't a prize you can win. It's a door that was never open. And the sooner you stop knocking, the sooner you can start building your own house." Metaphorically speaking, although I could also literally build my own house, which is one of the perks of being in construction, she was right. And that conversation was the beginning of something. Not just the end of my relationship with my family the way it had been, but the beginning of me actually valuing myself. Because here's something nobody tells you about being the family scapegoat. You don't just lose your family's respect. You lose your own. You internalize it. You start to believe that maybe you really are the problem. Maybe you really are too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. And it takes something seismic to shake that belief loose. Lily's question was my earthquake, and what I built from the rubble was going to be something nobody in my family saw coming. The weeks after Thanksgiving were rough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I threw myself into work because that's what I do when my personal life feels like a tire fire. I'd wake up at 5, hit a job site by 6:30, and not come home until 7 or 8 at night. Claire was patient, but she also wasn't going to let me use work as a way to avoid dealing with my feelings. She's good like that. Annoyingly good, sometimes. One night in early December, I came home covered in drywall dust, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 glasses of wine and a look on her face that meant we were about to have a conversation whether I wanted to or not. She said, "Sit down. We're going to talk about this." So I sat down, and she asked me a question that seemed simple but wasn't. She said, "Frank, who are you without your family's opinion of you?" I stared at her. I opened my mouth to answer, and nothing came out. Because the honest truth was, I didn't know. Everything I'd built, every late night, every contract I'd won, every employee I'd hired, some part of me had done it to prove them wrong. To prove Megan wrong. To prove my mom wrong. And if I took that away, if I stopped caring what they thought, who was I doing it for? Claire said, "You need to start doing it for yourself. And for us. And for the life we're building." She was right. She was annoyingly, beautifully right. And that night was the first night I started to let go. Not of the anger, not completely. That would take time. But of the need for their approval. I started prying those fingers loose, one by one. I also did something I'd been putting off for years. I called a therapist. His name was Dr. Evan Russo, and he was this no-nonsense guy in his 50s who looked like he could have been a football coach in another life. The first session, I gave him the whole story. My mom, Megan, the favoritism, Thanksgiving, all of it. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Frank, you've been playing a game that was rigged from the start. The only winning move is to stop playing." I said, "Did you just quote a movie at me?" He said, "I quoted Common Sense at you. The movie stole it." I liked Dr. Russo. He didn't coddle me. He told me straight up that I had a pattern of seeking validation from people who were never going to give it, and that I needed to redirect that energy toward the people and things that actually filled me up. He also told me that going no contact with my family wasn't giving up. It was self-preservation, and there was nothing selfish about protecting your own peace. So that's what I did. I stopped calling. I stopped texting. I didn't go to Christmas. My mom sent one text on Christmas Eve that said, "Merry Christmas, Frank. You're missed." No apology. No acknowledgement of anything. Just a passive-aggressive greeting card of a text message designed to make me feel guilty without her having to take any responsibility. I didn't respond. January hit, and I poured everything into the business. I'd been thinking about expanding for a while, getting into commercial HVAC installation, which is where the real money is. I'd been hesitant because it required a big upfront investment, new equipment, new certifications for my crew, and a leap of faith. But something about cutting ties with my family freed up this mental energy I didn't even know was being drained. It was like I'd been running with a 30-pound weight strapped to my back, and someone finally cut it loose. I took the leap. I put together a business plan, went to the bank, and got approved for a line of credit that made my palms sweat. I hired 3 new technicians, invested in training, and started bidding on commercial projects. The first one I landed was an HVAC retrofit for a mid-size office building. 40 units. It was the biggest job I'd ever taken on, and my crew crushed it. Under budget, ahead of schedule. The property management company was so impressed they referred me to 2 other buildings, and suddenly my phone was ringing with opportunities one couldn't have imagined 6 months earlier. By March, my revenue had doubled. By April, I'd hired for more people. By summer, I was pulling in more money in a month than my dad had made in a year at his peak. And I say that not to brag, but because the kid who was told he'd never amount to anything by pursuing a trade was now running a company that employed 19 people and had a backlog of work stretching into the next year. Claire and I also hit a milestone. We'd been dating for 2 years, and in February, right in the middle of all the business chaos, I took her to this little Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date, and I asked her to marry me. She said yes before I even finished the question, which she later told me was because I was shaking so badly she was afraid I'd drop the ring into the pasta. We set a date for October and started planning a small wedding. No drama, no spectacle, just us and the people who actually cared about us. But here's where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean cosmically ironic. While my life was taking off like a rocket, Megan's was doing the opposite. I didn't know this at the time because I wasn't talking to anyone in my family, but Derek kept me loosely in the loop because Derek is the kind of cousin who pretends to be Switzerland but actually lives for the gossip. Around February, Todd got laid off from his insurance job. Not downsized. Laid off for performance issues, which Derek said was a polite way of saying Todd had been doing the bare minimum for years and his company finally noticed. Megan's marketing job was fine, but it wasn't the kind of salary that could support a family of 3 plus a mortgage in the suburbs. They burned through their savings in a couple months because Megan and Todd had the financial planning skills of a golden retriever in a pet store. Derek told me they'd racked up credit card debt trying to maintain their lifestyle, and things were getting tense. Did I feel bad? A little. Todd's not a terrible person. He's just weak and kind of useless in a crisis. And Lily didn't deserve any of it. But Megan? The woman who called me a waste of space, who spent 2 decades making me feel like I was less than nothing. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a small, petty part of me that thought the universe was handling its business. I focused on my own world. Claire and I bought a house in May. Nothing crazy, a 3-bedroom ranch on 2 acres, but it was ours, and I renovated it myself over the summer because when you're a contractor, buying a fixer-upper is basically a professional obligation. New kitchen, new bathrooms, hardwood floors throughout. Claire said it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her, which tells you something about her ex-boyfriends. During all of this, I also started volunteering with a local program that teaches trade skills to at-risk teenagers. Every Saturday morning, I'd show up at this community center and teach kids how to wire an outlet or sweat a copper pipe. Those kids reminded me of myself at that age. Told they weren't smart enough for college. Told trades were for people who couldn't do anything else. I wanted them to know that was garbage. That you could build an empire with your hands if you were willing to work. It became one of the most meaningful things in my life, and it had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong. It was just good. Dr. Russo told me that was the shift. When you stop doing things to prove your worth to the people who doubt you and start doing things because they matter to you, that's when you've actually healed. I'm not going to pretend I was fully healed. I still had nights where I'd lie awake and wonder if my mom thought about me, if she missed me, if Megan ever felt guilty. But those nights got fewer and further between, and the mornings after got easier. By October, my company had been featured in a local business magazine. Small article, nothing national, but they named us one of the top growing contractors in the region. Claire framed it and put it on the wall of our new house, right at the end of the hallway. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't have to. We both knew what it meant. My picture was finally on a wall, and this time, my eyes were wide open. In mid-October, about 2 weeks before my wedding, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. It was Todd. He sounded like a man who'd been chewing on his own pride for about 3 hours before finally hitting the call button. "Frank," he said, and his voice was shaky. "I know we're not exactly on good terms right now, but I need to talk to you. It's about Megan and Lily." I leaned against my truck and said, "I'm listening." He took a long breath. "Things have gotten bad, Frank. Really bad. I still haven't found steady work. We're behind on the mortgage. Megan's been applying for second jobs, but nothing's come through. And Lily, she keeps asking about you. Every week she asks when she's going to see Uncle Frank again. It's breaking Megan's heart. It's breaking mine too. I waited for the part where he asked me for money, because I'm not an idiot and I could see where this was heading. But Todd surprised me. He said, "I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm calling because I think Megan owes you an apology and she's too proud to make the call herself. And I'm calling because I think you're a better man than any of us gave you credit for. And I should have said that a long time ago." I didn't know what to say to that. Todd had never spoken to me like an actual person before. He'd always been Megan's accessory, nodding along with whatever she said. This sounded like a guy who'd had the comfort stripped away and was seeing things clearly for the first time. I told him I appreciated the call and I missed Lily. Then I told him that if Megan wanted to talk, she knew my number. I wasn't going to chase anyone who'd spent 20 years running away from treating me with basic respect. He said he understood, and we hung up. Claire asked me about it that night, and I told her everything. She was quiet for a minute, and then she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to see Lily. I want Megan to actually reckon with what she's done, and I want my mom to stop pretending none of this is her fault." Claire nodded and said, "Then let Megan come to you. Don't go running back just because they're struggling. That's not reconciliation. That's convenience." She was right. Again, the woman was going to be insufferable as a wife if she kept being right about everything. But I loved her for it. 2 days later, Megan called. I was on a job site when I saw her name pop up on my screen. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, not out of pettiness, but because I genuinely needed those 3 rings to steady myself. "Hey, Megan," I said. There was a pause. Then she said, "Hey, Frank." Her voice was small, not the Megan I was used to. The Megan I knew spoke with authority and condescension baked into every syllable. This Megan sounded like someone who'd been crying. "Todd told me he called you," she said. "I told him not to. I wanted to do this myself. I just didn't know how." I said, "You could start with why you've been calling me a waste of space to your 6-year-old daughter." Another long pause. I could hear her breathing. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "I didn't call you that to Lily. I called you that to Todd. On the phone." I didn't know she was listening. I said, "Does that make it better?" She said, "No. It makes it worse, actually. Because it means I said it casually enough that it was just part of a regular conversation." That hit. For both of us. There was something in the way she said it that told me she'd actually thought about it. Not just the getting caught part. The actual meaning of what she'd done. How normalized her cruelty toward me had become. How it was so second nature to her that she could call her brother a waste of space without even noticing she was doing it. She said, "Frank, I've been a terrible sister to you. Not just at Thanksgiving. My whole life. I've been jealous of you and I turned that into meanness and I let Mom make it worse because it was easier than dealing with my own failures." I said, "Jealous of me? Megan, you spent our entire childhood being told you were the greatest thing since sliced bread. What could you possibly be jealous of?" She laughed, but it was bitter. "You always knew who you were, Frank. You went to trade school when everyone told you not to and you didn't care. You built a business from nothing. You never needed anyone's approval. I got a marketing degree because Mom told me it was practical, married Todd because Mom liked him, took a job I hate because it looked good on paper. I'm 37 years old, and I don't know what I actually want. I've been living Mom's life, not mine. And every time I looked at you doing your own thing and succeeding, it made me feel like a fraud. So I tore you down instead of dealing with that. I'm not going to pretend that made everything okay. It didn't. But it was the first honest thing Megan had ever said to me, and I could hear in her voice that it cost her something to say it. I told her I heard her. I told her that what she did was wrong, that it affected me deeply, and that I wasn't ready to just forgive and move on like nothing happened. She said she understood. Then she asked if there was any chance she and Lily could come to the wedding. That threw me. Claire and I had planned a small ceremony. 40 people, all friends, a few of my guys from work, Claire's family, Derek and Paige. No one from my immediate family. I told Megan I'd think about it, and we left it at that. I talked to Claire about it. I talked to Dr. Russo about it. And after about a week, I decided Megan could come. Not my mother. Not yet. But Megan, because she'd done something my mother never had. She'd taken responsibility. And Lily would be there, which was the real reason, if I'm being honest. The wedding was the last Saturday in October. Small venue, an old barn that had been converted into an event space on the outskirts of town. Claire looked like a dream. I looked like a guy who'd been trying not to cry since breakfast and was losing the battle. My best man was my buddy Jake, who I'd hired as my first employee years ago. The officiant was this retired judge that Claire's dad knew. It was simple, and it was perfect. Megan showed up with Lily, who was wearing a little yellow dress, and immediately ran up to me screaming, "Uncle Frank," like I was a celebrity. I scooped her up, and she hugged me so tight I thought she was going to crack a rib. Megan hung back, looking nervous and out of place, which was a new look for her. Claire walked over and hugged her, because Claire is a better person than most of us deserve, and told her she was glad she came. Megan's eyes filled up, and she whispered thank you. During the reception, Megan and I sat on the porch of the barn for a few minutes while Lily danced inside with Jake's daughter. She said, "I talked to Mom about calling you. She said you'd come around eventually, and that I shouldn't grovel." I said, "That sounds about right." She said, "I told her she was wrong. She didn't take it well." I nodded. That also sounded about right. Then Megan told me something that shifted my understanding of everything. She said, "Frank, did you know that Mom almost left Dad when we were kids? She stayed because of the house and the image. She's been performing this version of a happy family for 30 years, and anyone who threatens that performance gets cut. You standing up for yourself at Thanksgiving wasn't just an embarrassment. It was a threat to the whole production. That's why she chose me. Not because she loves me more. Because I played my part. You refused to." I sat with that for a long time. It didn't make it hurt less, but it made it make sense. The wedding ended with Claire and me slow dancing in the barn, while our friends cheered, and Lily threw flower petals she'd been hoarding all night. It was the happiest night of my life. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't thinking about what I was missing. I was thinking about what I had, what I'd built, and what was about to come next, because the universe wasn't done delivering karma yet. Not by a long shot. About 3 weeks after the wedding, I got a call from my mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the phone call where she told me not to come to Christmas nearly a year earlier. Seeing her name on my phone felt like touching an old bruise. I picked up, partly because I was curious and partly because Dr. Russo had told me that avoidance and healing are not the same thing. "Frank," she said, and her voice sounded different. Smaller, less certain. "I need to talk to you." I said, "All right. Talk." She said, "Not on the phone. In person. Can you come to the house?" I said, "That depends on what we're talking about." She hesitated. Then she said, "Your father had a heart episode. He's okay, he's home now, but it scared us. It scared me. And it made me realize that I've been handling things wrong." My stomach dropped. My dad, Greg, the guy who never rocked the boat, who let Diane run the show, who quietly slipped me $100 in a birthday card every year, even when my mom wasn't looking. The man wasn't perfect, but he loved me the best way he knew how, and the idea that something had happened to him hit me like a truck. I told her I'd come by the next day. I went alone. Claire offered to come, but I told her this was something I needed to do by myself. I pulled up to the house I grew up in and sat in the driveway for a minute, which was becoming a tradition at this point. Same ugly shutters. Same feeling of being 12 years old and hoping today would be different. I walked in and my dad was sitting in his recliner with a blanket on his lap, looking thinner than I remembered. He saw me and his eyes got watery and he said, "There's my boy." Just like that. No conditions. No qualifiers. Just there's my boy. I hugged him and held on longer than I probably should have, but he held on too. So I figured we both needed it. My mom came out from the kitchen and looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the woman who controlled everything. I saw a woman who was scared. Scared of losing her husband, her son, and the whole carefully constructed world she'd built. She sat down across from me and said, "Frank, I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything. I just waited. She said, "I have spent your entire life protecting the wrong things. I protected Megan because she needed it. She was always more fragile than you, more uncertain, and I thought if I built her up, she'd find her footing. But I built her up by tearing you down, and I told myself it was because you were strong enough to handle it. That wasn't fair. That was lazy. And that was cruel." She was crying now. Not the theatrical tears she'd use when she wanted sympathy at church. Real, messy, ugly crying. She said, "When you walked out at Thanksgiving, I was furious. But months went by, and you didn't come back, and I realized I'd pushed away the one child who'd never asked me for anything. You just went out and proved it. And I punished you for being self-sufficient by giving you nothing. I let her finish. Then I said, Mom, do you remember my Chamber of Commerce award? The one I invited you to? She nodded, looking at the floor. I said, you chose bathroom tiles. She flinched. I remember, she said quietly. I said, do you remember when I started my company and you told me someone has to do those jobs? She put her hand over her mouth. I said, do you remember the framed collage in the hallway? Megan's achievements? Do you know what's on my side? She shook her head. I said, a blurry photo where I had my eyes closed. She broke. Completely. She said, I'm so sorry, Frank. I'm so sorry. And you know what? I believed her. Not because it was enough. Not because words can undo 34 years of damage. But because she didn't try to explain it away. She didn't say, but you have to understand. She just said she was sorry and she meant it. My dad, who had been sitting there quietly the whole time, spoke up. He said, Frank, I owe you one too. I should have stepped in. I should have stood up for you. I was too worried about keeping the peace to protect my own son, and that's something I have to live with. Hearing that from Greg, a man who barely spoke above a conversational volume his entire life, carried weight. It carried a lot of weight. I didn't forgive them on the spot. That's not how this works. I told them I appreciated the apology and that I needed time. If we were going to rebuild, it had to be on new terms. No more pretending. No more choosing sides. My mom nodded and said, whatever you need. And for once, I believed she meant it. I told them about the wedding. My mom's face crumbled when she realized she'd missed it. She didn't guilt me. She just said, I'm glad you had a beautiful day. My dad asked to see pictures, and when he saw Claire, he smiled and said, she's a keeper, Frank. Over the next few months, things shifted slowly. My mom and I had coffee once a week. Nothing deep at first, just sitting in her kitchen, talking about normal stuff. She asked about my business. She actually listened. She asked about the volunteer program and told me she thought it was wonderful. Small steps, but real ones. Megan and I were rebuilding too, in our own way. She started therapy herself, which I took as a good sign. She also quit her marketing job and enrolled in a culinary program because, as it turned out, the thing Megan had always actually wanted to do was cook. Not market other people's products. Cook. She'd been afraid to pursue it because my mom had told her it wasn't a serious career, which was a level of irony that was almost too on the nose. Lily and I were thick as thieves again. She came over to the house every other weekend. Claire taught her how to make cookies. I taught her how to use a level, which she then used to determine that every painting in Megan's house was slightly crooked, which Megan found less charming than I did. That kid was going to be something special. At Thanksgiving, one full year after the dinner that blew everything up, Claire and I hosted. Our house. Our rules. My parents came. Megan and Lily came. Todd came. And he'd found a new job selling commercial real estate, which suited him because he could talk endlessly and someone was finally paying him for it. Derek and Paige came. Even Aunt Linda showed up with a casserole that tasted like it had been assembled with prayer and not much else. But we ate it and said it was great because that's what you do. Before we sat down to eat, my mom walked over to me in the kitchen. She had something in her hand. It was a framed photo. The Chamber of Commerce award ceremony. Someone had taken a picture that night, and she tracked it down. Me in a suit, holding the plaque, grinning like an idiot. She said, this is going on the wall, right next to Megan's collage. Actually, I'm taking the collage down. It's time for new pictures. I'm not going to tell you I didn't get choked up, because I absolutely did. Claire had to rescue the gravy because I couldn't see through the blur in my eyes. My dad patted me on the shoulder and went back to watching football like nothing had happened, which is the most Greg thing Greg has ever done. Dinner was loud and imperfect and wonderful. Lily sat next to me again and told me about her school play, where this year she'd been promoted from a tree to a talking sunflower, which she considered a significant career advancement. Megan caught my eye across the table and smiled. Not the old smile. Not the condescending one. A real one. After everyone left, Claire and I cleaned up the kitchen together. She bumped me with her hip and said, not bad for a waste of space. I laughed. I laughed hard. And then I kissed her, because this woman had stood by me through the worst year of my life and come out the other side still making jokes about it. I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect. My mom and I are still figuring things out. Megan and I still have awkward moments. Some damage doesn't fully heal. It scars over, and you learn to live with the texture. But here's what I know. I know that I built a life I'm proud of with my own hands. I know that the people who matter most are the ones who show up, not the ones who are obligated to. I know that a 6-year-old in a yellow dress taught me more about honesty than anyone twice her age. And I know that the guy who was called a waste of space is now the guy hosting Thanksgiving in a house he built, married to a woman who believed in him, running a company that employs 23 people and growing. So yeah, my name's Frank. I'm 35 now. And if you're out there sitting in your car in some driveway, wondering if you'll ever be enough for the people who are supposed to love you, let me tell you something. You already are. You just might need to find the people who can see it.